Happiness and Hunger by Buddhadasa Bhikkhu. Today's talk concerns something which most of you probably misunderstand. Although you've all come here with an interest in Buddhism, you may have some wrong understanding. For this reason, please gather your mental energies and set your mind to the task of listening well. Pay attention to what will be said today. This thing we'll talk about is happiness, sukha. This word is quite ambiguous both in Thai, kwam suk, and in the Pali language, sukha, as well as in English, happiness. In all three languages, this word has many varied meanings and applications. It's often difficult to understand exactly what people mean when they say the word happiness. Because this topic can get very mixed up, it is necessary to reach some understanding of this thing, which is why we'll speak about happiness today. The happiness felt in the everyday lives of ordinary people is one meaning of happiness. Then there is another kind of happiness, the happiness that arises with the realization of the final goal of life. There are these two very different things, but we call both of them happiness. Generally, we mix up these two meanings, confuse them, and never quite understand what we're talking about. Which happiness do you want? Here's one example of how the ambiguity of the word can cause problems. It's likely that you came here to study and practice Dhamma in search of happiness. Your understanding of happiness, the happiness you desire, however, may not be the same happiness that is the genuine goal of Buddhism and the practice of Dhamma. If the sukha happiness that you desire is not the sukha that arises from Dhamma practice, then we're afraid that you'll be disappointed or even heartbroken here. Thus, it's necessary to develop some understanding of this matter. In order to save time and make it easy for you to understand, let's set down a simple principle for the understanding of happiness. The usual happiness that common people are interested in is when a particular hunger or want is satisfied. This is the typical understanding of happiness. In the Dhamma sense, however, happiness manifests when there is no hunger or want at all, when we're completely free of all hunger, desire and want. Please help to sort out this matter right here by paying careful attention to the following distinction. Happiness due to hunger being satisfied and happiness due to no hunger at all. Can you see the difference? Can you feel the distinction between the happiness of hunger and the happiness of hungerlessness? Let's take the opportunity now to understand the words lokiya and lokuttara as they are relevant to the topic we're investigating today. Lokiya means going along according to worldly matters and concerns. Lokiya is to be in the world, caught within the world, under the power and influence of the world. Common translations are worldly and mundane. Lokuttara means above the world, to be beyond the power and influence of the world. It can be translated as transcendent or supramundane. Now we can more easily compare the two kinds of happiness. Lokiya sukha, worldly happiness, which is trapped under the power of, governed by the conditions and limitations of what we call the world, and Lokuttara sukha, transcendent happiness, which is beyond all influence of the world. Please recognize this distinction and understand the meaning of these two words as clearly as possible. We must look at these terms more closely. Lokiya means being stuck in the world and dragged along by the world so that worldly power and influence dominate. In this condition there is no spiritual freedom. It's the lack of spiritual independence. Lokuttara means being unstuck and released from the world. It is spiritual freedom. Thus, there are two kinds of happiness: happiness that is not free and happiness that is independent, the happiness of slavery and the happiness of freedom. This is the point that we're afraid you'll misunderstand. You've come here looking for Lokiya sukha, but you study Buddhism that offers the opposite kind of happiness. You're going to be disappointed. You won't find what you desire. The practice of Dhamma, including a wise meditation practice, leads to Lokuttara sukha and not worldly happiness, except as a byproduct. We must make this point clear from the very beginning. If you understand the difference between these two kinds of sukha, however, you'll understand the purpose of Suan Mok and won't be disappointed here. Now you understand the difference between the two kinds of happiness: the happiness that comes from getting what we hunger for, and the happiness of the total absence of hunger. How different are they? Investigate the matter and you will realize these things for yourself. The happiness of hunger satisfied and the happiness of no hunger, we cannot define them more succinctly or clearly than this. Endless hunger. Now let's further investigate how the happiness based on the satisfaction of hunger is hopeless and can never really be satisfied. The many things that arouse hunger are always changing. Whatever satisfies hunger changes, making that satisfaction fleeting and illusory, and so hunger returns. Hunger itself changes and hence can never be satisfied. By the time you get something, you may be hungering for something else. This situation is eternal. The world today is stuck on this happiness that comes with fulfilling desires. Consequently, the modern world is trapped in an endless problem. Imagine, if you can, that you are the sole owner of the world, of the universe, of the entire cosmos. Now that you are the owner of everything, does hunger stop? Can it stop? Would you please examine this carefully with and in your own mind? If you were to get everything that you could possibly desire, to the point that you owned the whole world, would your hunger cease? Or would you hunger for a second universe? Would you want a third? Consider the fact that hunger never ends by our attempts to satisfy it. In spite of this, the world today continues to evolve. Education systems and technological developments that seek merely to produce ever more lovely and satisfying things. Economies produce things that consume, and we are educated to value such consumption above all else. Modern technology and science are slaves of hunger. Our world is falling into this deep hole of endlessly producing increasingly seductive things to try to satisfy hunger. But where are you going to find happiness in such a world? I'd like to make some comparisons to illustrate how the worldly happiness of common sentient beings advances from phase to successive phase. The newborn infant is happy when it is cuddled in its mother's arms and sucks milk from her breast. This satisfies the infant until it grows a little older and bigger. Then the mother's arms and breasts aren't enough. It learns about other foods and delights. Now its happiness depends on ice cream, candy, and junk food, on playing little games and running around the house. Then it grows older, and those games don't satisfy the child anymore. It wants to play football or play with dolls. These two are outgrown eventually, and the teenager's interest and happiness revolve around sex. The previous kinds of satisfaction are of no more interest. When it becomes a young man or woman, don't expect it to be satisfied with the old types of happiness. Now all it thinks about is sex and dates. Finally, this human being marries, becomes a wife or a husband, and has hopes and wishes tied up in a house, money, and possessions. There is no way it can be satisfied with childish happiness, unless it hasn't really grown up. The human being changes from stage to stage, so happiness also changes from stage to stage, as does hunger for happiness. The change is continuous and endless. Hunger develops from stage to stage until death. After that, many believe there is a rebirth as a deva, celestial being, and still there's hunger. Heavenly hunger for happiness of devas, it never stops. Even in heaven, with the gods, or in the kingdom of God, should such things exist, hunger doesn't stop. In Buddhism, these are all considered examples of worldly happiness that only deceives and confuses.